We are going to walk through a little bit how we do a test strip. Now, a test strip needs to do a couple of different things. It's super important for when you actually start making bigger prints. It will save you money, it will save you time, it will save you hassle, it will save your life. Um, yeah, it's a good idea. You should always do a test strip. People are like, I don't want to do a test strip. I want to save time and money. And you're like, okay, but you don't do a test strip, then you're going to have to make the print twice. And that's going to cost you money and take your time, so don't do it. Test strip is basically, and I don't have them with me because they're in my office. It's a strip, right? Strip of paper that is the full width of whatever printer you're printing on. So if you're printing on a 36-inch wide printer, it is a 36-inch wide strip. If you're printing on a 48-inch wide piece of paper, roll of paper on your printer, it's a 48-inch wide strip. I should put my hands inside the frame, right? This is not 48 inches, but out here, you can't even see them. So whatever your paper size is, that's the size of your test strip. It is printed on the paper, on the printer that your final is going to be on. Otherwise, there's no point, right? You want to see what is it actually going to look like when you actually print it out. This is where we discover all the differences between what we see on our screen and what we see in the actual piece of paper. So really, really important that we match our paper and our printer from the final, from the test strip to the final. If at some point we are able to print effects again, you will need to be aware of what printer they are printing it on. You should confirm that with them, and you should then reconfirm when you get the final print done, right? So if I get a test strip and I'm like, I have not started my screen recording yet, but it doesn't matter because I haven't been doing anything yet. And I'm like, oh, I printed this test strip on the Epson 11D Jillian and 4 on premium luster paper. Make sure that when you print my final, it's also going to be on the Epson 11D Jillian 4 on premium luster paper, right? That's how we verify we're checking the first one, seeing what it looks like in that test, and then we should get exactly the same result if we don't change anything. In the final, if we do change something, we would do another test strip, take a look at that, blah, 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 so that eventually you got to a point where you looked at the test strip, you're like, oh, this is amazing, send it to the printer, looks exactly the same. So that is our goal. So let's go ahead and walk through how this works. There is a handout. I'm going to go up to the shared Google Drive folder. And there's a handout in the handouts folder. There is an assignment description for assignment 10, which is what this is, in the assignment descriptions folder. But both of those are also here in sample files and MISC under week 13. So here's some files in here. Out of gamut 1, 2, and 3. What's out of gamut, you ask? Assignment 10, distance learning revision, the test strip handout. The test strip handout, it's not exactly the same because I'm not using the same file. It also talks about bringing your folder or your file from Lightroom into Photoshop, which if it's already PSD that you've been working on, you can just open it directly from Photoshop. But that info is there. And then there is this TS sample file folder with this relatively honkin' PST. So I know it's a big file, but go ahead and download that. The out of gamut ones at least are a little bit smaller. So let's go ahead while that is downloading in this pretend synchronous world, and let's take a look at the assignment 10. So assignment 10, making a test strip, right? You knew that already. So the way that we make a test strip is that we have our file, right, our final file that we want to print. Right? In your case, it is your Project 3 file. At this point, it may or may not be totally done, but it's there, it exists, and it should be in the correct size, right? So you've image sized it so that it is fulfilling the requirements of being at least 18 by 24. So you've image sized it correctly, it's at the right resolution, whatever that final resolution is going to be, and it's in the correct color space, whatever that color space is. If the file you're working with is not like that, right? If you are making a test strip from something that is not the correct size, also bit depth, right? So like 8-bit, 16-bit. If you're not working with a file that is the correct size, bit depth, color space, etc., your test strip will be pointless, right? The goal is to have your file be the file that you would go and take to your printer to have your final print made, and we are just making test strips from it. So the test strip is something that you make when you are at the point of being ready to print. You don't make it in the beginning, because what is the point? I mean, I can think of a couple of tiny points, but no, not really. So you need we'll make a blank document, right? That document will be the size of our strip of paper that we're going to print on. So it'll be the full width of whatever that printer is printing on. So our files, right, are going to be at least 18 by 24. If they're 24, you could have it be a 24-inch wide strip of paper. If they are wider than that, it would probably be a 36-inch wide piece of paper. It's going to depend a little bit on which printer you were using. So because we're not using any printers, we'll have a hypothetical 24, 36, and 48-inch printer that you can just arbitrarily invent. So your canvas, you'll make a new document that will have that size by whatever the minimum is that your printer will print. Or if that's a very small amount, maybe like 8, 10, 12 inches. In this case, we're going to do it 8 inches high. So if you actually were printing something at PrintFX or some other printer, they would have a minimum, right? They'd be like, oh, we don't print anything shorter than 12 inches. And then you would make it 12 inches. Or they'd be like, oh, we will print an 8-inch one. And you're like, cool, 8 inches. It will also depend a little bit on the file, and the complexity, and how much you want to see, and all that stuff. But for the moment, width of your paper, right, 24, 36, 48 by the height, and we'll arbitrarily choose 8 inches. So we're going to make that file. I'm going to walk through how to do that now. What you're going to turn in to me, obviously originally you would turn in an actual printed out test strip. That's not going to happen. So we're going to make a file, and we will turn that in. It will be proof that you know what you're doing, and that one day when we have access to printers, you will be better off than all those suckers who don't know how to do it. So let's go ahead back into the Google Drive, and in that week 13 folder, let's go ahead. We're going to open up the test strip sample file, but make sure that you've downloaded all of these, because I am going to walk through some of them. I'm also going to briefly touch on the handout. Here's the handout here. I'm going to walk through pretty much the same process, but it's not going to be completely precise. Walking through the test strip, right, or test strip handout is good. We'll give you that information, but it's not going to be a one-to-one with me following along with it, because I don't have the same file. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up that test strip sample file. So this file, by the way, this is why we used to do test strips. So this is an image that is, what is it? I think it ended up being 30 by 40, right? So this is a gigantic image. So 30 by 40, it's still at over 300 ppi. That's because it is a shot on 4x5 film, scanned on an Imicon. You can see that's me out here taking a picture of a tree with a strobe. You may ask yourself, why are you doing that? It's a good question. So this is what sort of the test strip was originally for, right? Making these giant ass prints, right? You don't really need to make giant ass prints, right? Giant ass prints, I don't know that they're all that meaningful. But, you know, they were important, right? The test strip is a way to see if your print was going to look good before you spent $300 making a 30 by 40 print. So that was important. I'm going to get rid of that. I don't need to see that. Okay, here's our sample file. So if we go over here and look at the layers, there are a bunch of layers because it's actually a composite of a couple of different frames to be able to get enough height. If I go and look at the image size, it is 34 by 26 and 180 pixels per inch. So I know that I am going to be printing it on a roll of paper that if our options are 24, 36, and 48, I'm going to be printing it on a 36-inch piece of paper because the height is 26, and so it won't quite fit on that 24-inch wide roll. So, okay, so we know it's going to be 36-inch wide roll. The important thing to get from image size, right, and again, this is image size or Command Option I. The important thing to get here is not just the size, but also the resolution. So it's 180 pixels per inch, whatever yours is, right? It doesn't matter. I mean, it should be more than 150, ideally more than 180. But if it's like 184.8, that's also fine. You just need to remember that and write it down, right? So at this point in the game, look at your resolution, write it down in your hand. Don't write it down in your hand. It's so juvenile. So write it down in your brain. I'd be better off writing it down in my hand with the state of my brain, and hit OK. Let's also check the bit depth, right? So image mode, we're at 8-bit. That's cool. Again, I don't need to change it. I just need to remember it. And then color profile, we are Adobe RGB 1998. Cool. Again, don't need to change it. Just need to remember it. And I did that by, I went down to convert to profile and just checked the source space. I'm not going to convert it to anything. It's fine like it is. Cool. So now I'm going to go ahead and make a new document. So File, New, and I'm going to call it something involving test strip so that I know where it is. There are specs in the assignment description that should tell you what you actually need to name these things, but I'm going to call it that. Remember, the width was going to be inches, 36 inches. And the height, again, we have it at 8. Okay, things to remember, right? We were remembering our resolution. It was 180. Cool. Color mode, remembering that, it's 8-bit. Cool. Color profile, right? If you don't see this, you may need to go down to advanced. Our color profile, if you will remember, is Adobe RGB 1998. So I'm setting up a new document that is the width of my paper roll, 8 inches high, matches the resolution of my final file, and matches the bit depth and also the color space of the final file as well. Beautiful. So there it is. It's a lovely test strip. It is blank, so that's not super useful yet. There are two things that we want in a test strip. We want to have the overall shrunk down, and then we want to have important pieces not shrunk down. Right? We want the overall shrunk down so we can check sort of the whole exposure color thing. Right? That we need the whole thing all there. It's got this small piece of paper to fit on, so we shrink it down. The pieces that we do not shrink down are the ones that we want to see, okay, at their final print size, right? If I were to print the whole thing out, what do they look like? You know, is it sharp enough? Do I have a little bit of blur in there? Do I need some more grain? Do I have too much grain? All of these things. So easiest way to do that. So as I'm looking at my file here, I have a bunch of layers. If this were a file that were ready to print, right, I'd save as'd it or whatever, maybe it wouldn't have any layers. But it's not, right? This is a file that I'm still working on. So I want to make sure that I do not flatten all these layers. The problem with that right now is if I go in and I want to copy a part of this image and shrink it down, if I select all and copy, I'm just copying whatever layer I happen to be on. In this case, I'll be copying nothing because I'm on an adjustment layer. If I went to one of the pixel layers, I would copy only the pixels that were on that particular pixel layer. Also, not good. So what I'm going to do is something that we're going to do several times during this demo. I'm going to select something. In this case, I'm selecting all, Command A. Then I go down to Edit. And instead of just saying copy or whatever, I'm going to say copy merged. That is also Command-Shift-C for those of you working on the Mac. So copying merged, what it does is whatever area I have selected, it copies all the layers, right? So it just copies them all as if they were flattened, right? And so now I have this flattened version of my selection. I can go back to my test strip demo, paste it in. You'll see when it pastes in, it's only one layer. I'm not going to rename my layers because we're just going to flatten them as soon as we're done. So this is cool, it's in there. I can grab the Move tool V on the keyboard to get that and move it around. But obviously it's way too big, right? It's not fitting on the test strip, which should be obvious because the final file is bigger than this little test strip. If the final file were smaller than the test strip, we wouldn't be making a test strip, we would just be making a print. So I'm going to free transform on that layer. That's Command T as in transform, Shift, drag in that corner to shrink it down, and I'm just going to shrink it just so that it fits on my 8-inch by 36-inch test strip. Hit return. Okay. So what we have now is that we have this, remember that's our whole piece of paper, and we have a shrunk down version of everything. That is the #1 thing that we need to have. Shrunk down version of everything, and then we're going to get the important bits. So shrunk down version of everything is there. Remember, the test strip, when it comes out in the real world, will be a physical object. So if you can rotate your thing, right, if this were a portrait, right, it would make sense for me to rotate it so that it's horizontal so I can get a little bit bigger in my test strip. So rotating stuff doesn't matter because you'll have it on a piece of paper and you can turn the piece of paper. Okay, so there is my shrunk down everything. I'm going to go back here. And now I need to figure out which parts of the image are important. Command D to deselect, come back up here, grab the marquee tool, M on the keyboard. I know I want this guy down here. He's important. And same kind of thing, right? So I draw the selection box, copy merged, come back here to the test strip demo, paste. Right, then I can grab the Move tool, V on the keyboard, and move him around, right? I just want to be able to fit as many pieces as we can. Come back here, deselect, Command D, M for marquee tool. Usually I want to get the 4 corners because those are the areas where things are going to be most likely to be out of focus or my lens is not that great. Copy merged, right? I'm getting this fine detail of the tree. I want to see if that white of the sky, if it's paper white, if I saw some tone in there, what that tone looks like. Paste, V for the Move tool, move it around. I'm going to go ahead and get some corner, right? Select the corner, copy merged, back to the test strip, Command V to paste, V on the keyboard to get the Move tool. Just going to stick it down over here. They overlap a little bit, right? As long as this isn't covering up anything that I'm super worried about, that's probably fine. You know, I'm going to put it over here. Right, so this is sort of how the game works. Let's come over here, get a little bit over there, copy. Oops, I screwed up. I hit copy instead of copy merged. Copy merged, there you go. Back to the test strip, boom. Okay. So I would go back through, make sure I had all the pieces that I thought were relevant. Maybe I'll get a little bit of background there. Again, copy merged and paste. Okay. I'm going to paste that same one in a little bit just so I can get the top of it in there. Okay. All right, so let's assume that this is all that I need, right? So I've got shrunk down overall, I've got mission critical pieces, the subject, this kid, I've got the top of that tree, I've got the corner over here that I'm more worried about, I've got the detail in the trash can and the graffiti, and then I've got this sort of far away middle distancey thing. Oh, you know, there's some clouds up here. Let's get a little piece of cloud just so we can see what the tone looks like. deselect Command D, marquee tool, M on the keyboard to select, copy merged, paste. I'm kind of running out of space. All right, I take it back. I'm not going to care that much about it. I take that layer and delete it. What I do not want to do is I don't want to shrink it down to make it fit. Right? That's the whole point, is that these things aren't shrunk, that they are at the size that they should be in the final print. Once I've got all those elements laid out, I can flatten it and save it, send it on to the printer. The one other thing that you should be paying attention to, and we don't really have a good way to check it right now, right? Sort of the way that we're set up right now, it's going to be difficult to do, but I wanted to bring it up anyway because it is important, and hopefully you will get into it a little bit more in some of your later classes. So in that demo files thing, there were some files with the word out of gamut in them. I'm going to open up one of them, yet more out of gamut. So gamut, and this is, it's so frustrating because it's a whole discussion. Gamut is sort of like all the colors you can have, right? We talked about these different color spaces, right? We've got sRGB, Adobe RGB, 1998, ProPhoto, whatever. Each one of those color spaces has a set of colors, right? That's why they call it a color space. So they can represent these colors and tones. If you have a photo that has colors and tones that are not inside of a color space, right? So I have a file that is has a bunch of rainbow colors, and my color space is super drab or is even black and white, right? Maybe it's a monochrome color space. I cannot represent those colors in that color space, right? If you imagine having a color photo and printing it in a black and white newspaper, those things still exist, right? That would be a color photo, right? But it's not able to be represented in the second color space. Those colors are out of gamut, right? The gamut is like that set of colors. Out of gamut means that they're not in there. It can't represent them. This is a picture of someone doing a performance art piece with a black light getting tattooed for like 24 hours. Anyway, I'll go into it another time. So looking at this, right, this is a super, super intense blue. It's also interesting that, right, some of my camera sensor picks up that UV light in a different way than my eye did. When your eye looks at the UV light, it's just this really, really impossibly deep blue. When the camera looks at it, it's more sensitive to UV, and so you get sort of a brighter, pinker bit in the middle. But the important thing is my screen is RGB, right? The B in RGB stands for blue. That's going to be hard to print. So it is likely that this color is out of gamut for whatever I'm printing it with. The way that we can check that would be in Photoshop, going up to View, Proof Setup, and then you would select from a list the printer and paper combination that you were trying to proof for, right? So you're trying to get your monitor to show you what this printer would give you, right? I'm printing on some, terrible printer. It's like, okay, well, your picture's going to look terrible, right? Like, it could be a great picture, but the data won't be translated well, the colors won't be translated well. So this is what proofing does. If you are on a super fancy computer sitting pre-press in some printer in Sweden, right, they are going to have everything perfectly calibrated. I don't. So it's not as directly useful for representing it, but it is good to give me an idea of where the problems are, right? We're not really going to be able to do this because we don't have the color profiles for the printers that we would be using, and we're not printing on them anyway, so it doesn't matter. But knowing this, right, having this like in that brain somewhere is going to be super helpful because it will come up again and again. So I went in here to customize proof condition and proof conditions device to simulate. I just clicked on that. I've got a whole bunch of random things. I am going to go up here. Here we go. Japan Color 2002 newspaper. So that is a Japanese color set for printing on newsprint, right? You can imagine that is not a super robust way of representing color. And as soon as I selected that, right, the color, right, totally crapped out. So this is my computer trying to show me what's going to happen when I print on this sort of unfriendly CMYK newsprint combo. That means that if I go up here to View and click on Gamut Warning, right, anything that was out of that first color space, right, anything that wasn't able to fit into that color space got changed so that it could fit in the color space, and it became a lot lamer looking. That means that everything that changed was previously out of gamut. So when I turn on the gamut warning, right, View Gamut Warning or Command-Shift-Y, all of a sudden, you can see that almost the entire blue area goes to a flat gray. That's Photoshop telling me, hey, dude, this part, you're going to have some color shifts. The reason that I mention that is that when you are making a test strip, that is another thing to look for, right? So mission critical areas that you're concerned about detail, that you're concerned about, are they sharp enough? Are they too grainy? Is there noticeable blur? Is the color in this area, does that look good? If you have areas that are out of gamut, right, which again, we can't check this right now, but you will be able to do it eventually. You would want to include those in your test strip too, so that you could see what happens. Right, so that if you were like, oh, it's going to look like that, you're like, yeah. So that's the other thing. It's something we'll squirrel away in the back of your head for another day when we will need that as you get more advanced into actual printing. But for the moment, here's our test strip. I'm not going to put any gamut, anything on there. I suspect we probably don't have a lot of stuff that's out of gamut in that image anyway. I'm going to go over here to my layers. I'm going to come up here and say flatten image, right? Because every time I paste, it makes a new layer. So I have this like 20 bajillion layers. I don't want to give my printer something that has a bunch of layers because they could screw it up, right? Like, they're very busy people. Okay, so I've flattened this. I'm not changing anything because it's already set up to the right size and the right pixel dimension, or the right PPI, the right bit depth, the right color space. All of that we set at the very beginning. I'm not resizing anything. Just flattening it, save asing it, giving it to my printer. When you do save it, if you're going to be giving it to your printer, I would always put the date in it, right? Because you are probably going to be making a series of test strips based on what the first one looks like. You're like, oh, okay, it's too green, it's too dark. Adjust. God. Adjust. Make another test strip, right? Get that back. Okay, this is now not too green, but it's a little bit too bright. Adjust. Another test strip, turn it in, get it back. Perfect. So you want to be putting the date on those when you're really turning them in for printing, so that you don't get confused about which one and send in one that you've already had printed. Cool. So that is the magic of test strips. You will need that to do assignment number 10. Assignment number 10, which if you... Oh, shoot. Sorry. I thought I already had it open. There we go. So now looking at the assignment description, it should all make sense. You should know what all of these terms are. Again, things to remember: print size, resolution, bit depth, color space, matches your sort of final ready to go print, and that you need to have shrunk down overall and then not shrunk down, resize anything, pieces And those pieces and the overall are copy merged and then pasted. So that should be it. You'll turn in an 8-bit Adobe RGB 1998 TIFF file. I say that it should be matching whatever your final print is. So I don't remember if your Project 3 file is supposed to be an 8-bit Adobe RGB 1998 TIFF. I will look at that right now. Yes, okay. One layered 8-bit Adobe RGB 1998, good. So your test strip will be an Adobe RGB 1998 TIFF file, and that will match the color space and bit depth of what your final Project 3 file will be. So all of that works out. Okay, go ahead and do that. Again, this week it's basically make the test strip, catch up on anything you're missing, and study for the final exam. Project 3 is due along with the final exam next week, and the final exam will be opening Monday morning, or probably Sunday night, and closing end of the day Wednesday or early Thursday morning. So hit me up with any questions, and otherwise, good luck.